This is a model lecture of English Linguistics at School of Global Japanese Studies, Meiji University. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Masanori Oya. I'm an Associate Professor, School of Global Japanese Studies, Meiji University. So, the topic of my talk is Introduction to Linguistics. And I'm going to talk about the three things. First, what is linguistics? Next, how is linguistics studied? And lastly, why is linguistics worth studying? These are the topics I'm going to talk about in this lecture. So, let's start. What is linguistics? Before moving on to the next slide, I'm going to ask this question to you. What is linguistics? Have you heard the word linguistics? And if you have heard about that, then what is the image you have when you hear the word linguistics? Maybe this is the first time for you to read the word linguistics. So you may not have any idea about what linguistics is all about. So I'd like to paraphrase that question into this. What do you learn when you're learning English? So I think every one of you has learned English at junior high and high school. Then I'm sure you have learned English or some other foreign language in your junior high or high school. So what do you learn when you're learning a language? So before moving on to the next slide, please think a little bit about that. So what kind of things have you learned when you are learning English or other foreign languages? If I'm teaching in a classroom, then I can ask them some questions. The same question to every one of each individual students, but unfortunately, I cannot do that. So assuming that I have heard your answers, I'd like to move on to the next slide. When you are learning English, then you are going to learn many English words. Of course, you will do that. And when you are learning English words, these are the things you have to learn. First of all, you have to learn the spelling of each word, each English word, I mean. Also, you have to learn how to pronounce that word. And you also have to learn the meaning of each of these English words. Of course, the story doesn't end here. You have to be able to use them when you're going to express what you mean, express your ideas. Okay? So you have to be able to use them. You have to be able to write grammatical sentences using these words. So when you say you are learning English words, you are learning these four things. Okay? Of course, there are some other things you have to learn when you are learning English. You also have to learn English grammar. Grammar means how to order words in a sentence and how to change word forms. That's what you have to learn. And how to translate Japanese sentences into English ones or vice versa. You have to be able to translate English sentences into Japanese ones. Okay? So these are the things you have to learn when you are going to learn English grammar. Okay? It's a matter of fact. Also, you are going to learn how to talk with people who can speak in English conversation. So you have to learn what to say in which situation. When you are asked how to go to a certain place, such as post office or a station, then you have to be able to explain where to go and which direction you have to take, and so on and so forth. You have to be able to say what is supposed to say in a certain situation. That's what you have to learn when you're going to learn how to talk in English. And you also have to be able to sound polite. Politeness is very important. And also, all in all, you have to be able to understand native speakers talk. And you're, all of them are subdivisions of linguistics, actually. So you already have started learning linguistics when you have started learning foreign language, especially in English. Okay? Why is it? Because when you are going to learn spelling of an English word, then you have started learning morphology. And morphology is a subdivision of linguistics which deals with the forms of words of a language. Okay? Spelling and word forms, which are the areas of morphology. And when it comes to pronunciation, it is phonetics. Phonetics is the subdivision of linguistic study which deals with how to pronounce each sound in a certain language. And English is one of them. And the knowledge of phonetics helps you to pronounce English words native-like, okay? And the word meaning, or the meaning in general, that's the area of semantics. It is also a subdivision of linguistics. When you are going to learn a meaning of English vocabulary, you have started learning semantics. And how to use them, or how to connect, or how to organize these words into a sentence. That's what syntax is all about. Okay? So now you know you have already started learning linguistics once you have started learning a language. And learning an English means learning some subdivisions of linguistics. And how to use these sentences, how to use English in discourse, then that's what pragmatics is all about. So what to say, in which situation, how to sound polite, and how to understand native speakers talk, that's what pragmatics is all about. So more specifically, pragmatics is a subdivision of linguistics which deals with how language is used in reality. Okay. And also, some of you want to teach English at junior high or high school in future. Then you are going to be able to teach a language or teach English. So then you have to learn second language acquisition or SLA. That's what you have to learn when you are going to teach English at college, not college, but junior high or high school. So you have to learn second language acquisition to be a good teacher of English. So let me summarize this part. When you are learning a language, you are a linguist. So when you are going to answer the question, what is linguistics? Actually, you have already answered to that question. What is linguistics? That's what you are doing when you are learning a language. When you are learning English, then you are doing the basics of linguistics. Let me repeat this. When you are learning a language, you are a linguist. Of course, that doesn't end the story. You can learn more advanced level of linguistics at college. So if you're interested in that, you can know more about linguistics at college. So what is the advanced level of linguistics? I'm going to show you the definition of linguistics in technical terms. So what you see on the screen is the definition provided by Linguistic Society of America, and let me read this definition. Linguistics is the science of language, and linguists are scientists who apply the scientific method to questions about the nature and function of language. So this is the definition or the meaning of linguistics. So linguistics is the science of language, and linguists are scientists who apply the scientific method to the phenomena related to language. Okay, so at college you can learn more about linguistics, and that is the science of language. Okay, so the answer to the question, what is linguistics? I think I have answered to this question. So the next question is, how is linguistics studied? More specifically, how is linguistics studied at college level? That's the question I have to answer, but I would like you to think about this before my moving on to the next slide. So what will be your answer? Now let me answer the question, how is linguistics studied? Before answering that question, I have to answer the question, what is scientific method? Because as you have seen that linguistics is defined in this way, and this definition includes the phrase scientific method. In order to answer this definition of linguistics, we have to be able to answer the question, what is scientific method? Okay, so that's why I'm asking this question, what is scientific method? There are so many different ways to define this phrase, but the most important definition of this is this. To break down this method into three different steps. First, observing the phenomenon, and then after observing the phenomena, formulating a hypothesis in order to be able to explain that phenomenon. Then just formulating a hypothesis is not enough. We have to test that hypothesis. These three steps are the usual steps to be taken in order to understand the phenomenon scientifically. So that's what scientific method is all about. So let me explain each one of these steps. First, observing phenomena. So I like to concentrate on one example when I'm going to explain what scientific method in linguistics. And the example is second language acquisition, or SLA. So the phenomenon is this. Children can acquire their first language quite rapidly without classroom instruction. They have not yet started their instruction at classroom, or they are too young to go to school, but they can acquire their first language quite rapidly without any formal instruction at classroom. But why is it? Some linguists have that question, and then what they are going to do after observing the phenomena, it is formulating a hypothesis. So what is the hypothesis they have formulated? It is this. Babies use language acquisition device, or LAD, when acquiring their first language. Now, here comes a technical term, language acquisition device. We have to have a clear definition of that term before moving on to the next step. So I'm going to show you the definition of this term, language acquisition device. It is a little bit a long one, so let me read. It is a hypothetical mechanism based on generative grammar introduced in 1964 by the US linguist and philosopher Noam Chomsky. So what did he do? He tried to explain how children acquire internalized knowledge of grammar with remarkable speed on the basis of fragmentary and degenerate input data. So maybe this definition is too long, so I like to put it in a much simpler term. So the basic, the essence of LAD is that LAD allows babies to acquire their first language through the input from their environment. The environment means the parents, their relatives, or friends at the kindergarten, and they acquire their first language through the input they get from their environment. Okay, so this is the process. Babies are born with LAD, which is inherent, I should say. Every baby has that ability or competence which allows them to acquire language, human language, I mean. And this LAD allows them to acquire the language used by people around them just by listening to it, and this is the input before going to school. And then through the limited input, yes, it is limited. It is limited. The amount of the input is limited. Limited means the parents or relatives have not spoken every possible sentences of that language. If the first language is Japanese, the parents and relatives and friends have not spoken every possible sentences of that language. It's impossible. So in this meaning, the input is limited, even though the amount and variation of input are limited, the babies can acquire the grammar of that language, which can generate an infinite number of sentences. Okay, so even though the amount and types of input are limited, children or babies eventually acquire the grammar of that language, which can generate many different ways. The number of sentences they can generate is infinite. There are so many different sentences they can produce, they can generate. But why is it? That's what linguists are trying to answer the question. What is the property of LAD? That's one area of linguistic research. And also, LAD also allows learners of a second language, just like us. We are learning English as second language, and that LAD also allows learners, just like us, of a second language to acquire the second language through the input from the environment. In our environment, we learn English, just like the babies did when learning the first language. But how can we do that? That's what we have to investigate. And this is yet another hypothesis, which was created by Krashen. Stephen Krashen is a linguist in the States, and he proposed the input hypothesis in 1982, or in the beginning of 1980s. It seems to be old, but actually it was influential around that time. Or I should say, it can be still influential. Of course, there must be a debate whether or not input hypothesis but before just ignoring or denying the importance of the input hypothesis, we have to test that hypothesis. Okay, so before talking about testing a hypothesis, I'd like to explain the input hypothesis. So Stephen Krashen stated in this way: we acquire the second language by understanding language that contains structure and a bit beyond our current level of competence, and it is called I+1. And also Krashen stated this in this way: comprehensible input. We need comprehensible or understandable input in order to acquire the second language. Okay? it is meaningless if the input is too difficult to understand. Such input doesn't lead to acquisition of the language. What we need is comprehensible input in order to acquire a second language. Okay? So after formulating a hypothesis, just like the input hypothesis, what we have to do in the next step is to test that hypothesis. Okay? First, we have to observe the phenomenon around us. Then, after the observation, we formulate a hypothesis, and after that, we are going to test that hypothesis. Okay? So after the creation of the input hypothesis, that hypothesis has been tested by many researchers of SLA along with other hypotheses. Okay, and there are other hypotheses along with input hypothesis, but these hypotheses must be tested before being accepted. Okay? So after that, research has shown that input is not enough for SLA. For a second language acquisition, just input is not enough to acquire a language. That's what has been revealed through research. Thanks to the research, we know that input is not enough. Then what is needed? New hypothesis must be formulated in order to explain the phenomenon more effectively. Okay? Then that hypothesis must be tested through research. Okay? One of the new hypotheses is output. Output is also required. Output in this case means the utterance you create. If you are going to speak in English, that's what output is all about. Okay, so that's what we need in order to acquire a language, and especially English. Okay, so comprehensible output hypothesis has been formulated by Swain and Lapkin in 1995. Of course, they are not the only researchers who proposed that, but not just input, but output is also important in second language acquisition. Then, as you can imagine, this hypothesis must be tested in order to be able to accept that as truth or some fixed knowledge. Okay? The debate still goes on, and if you are interested in that, then try to learn more about SLA, second language acquisition. Don't you think it is interesting or not? So this is a cycle of scientific method. First, you have to observe what is going on around you. What is going on as a phenomenon? Okay, observe the phenomenon. Okay, after that, you have to formulate a hypothesis. Then, just thinking in that way is not enough. That hypothesis must be verified through research or experiment. So you have to test whether or not that hypothesis is correct or not. Then, after that, you may find out yet another phenomenon. Then, after that, you also formulate a hypothesis, and the cycle never ends. That's what scientific method is all about. Okay, so in this way, I have answered the question, how is linguistics studied? Now, let's move on to the next question. Why is linguistics worth studying? So, let's move on to the question, why is linguistics worth studying? After watching the last part of the video, you may wonder, yeah, I understand that linguistics is a science, and the science means that when you are studying linguistics, you have to use the scientific method and so on and so forth. Okay, I understand that, but so what? what is the meaning of studying linguistics? I cannot understand what it is, and so on and so forth. Maybe you are thinking in that way. Well, then I have to answer the question, why is linguistics worth studying? What is the meaning of studying linguistics? What is it? So that's what I have to answer. Okay. So before answering that question, I'm going to break down the reasons why we have to learn linguistics. There are two types of reasons. The first one is practical reasons. The next one is the fundamental reason. Okay, so let me talk about practical reasons of studying linguistics. Practical reasons. First of all, we'll be able to learn a language more effectively if we know a little bit about linguistics. Why is it? Because knowledge of phonology allows you to pronounce words in other languages more effectively. Okay? Phonology is the pattern. Phonology is the subdivision of linguistics, which deals with the patterns of sounds of human languages. And then knowledge of phonology allows you to pronounce words in other languages, English is one of them, more effectively. So it's worth studying. Okay? And next, knowledge of morphology and syntax allows you to understand the grammar of other languages more effectively. So if you know the grammar of that language, you'll be able to create sentences which are grammatically correct, and grammatically correct sentences of that language are very important for effective and smooth communication using that language. And that's why we need to learn the grammar of that language. And when doing that, some knowledge of morphology and syntax will be there for the help of your learning of that language. Okay, that's why we need to learn morphology and syntax so that your learning process of that language will become more effective or efficient. Okay, so that's why we need to learn morphology and syntax. And knowledge of pragmatics allows you to communicate with people with different cultural background. Okay, so one of the reasons why we learn a language is to know more about the culture, which is different from our own. Okay, when we are going to learn English language, then that means we are going to learn the culture of the people who use English. So not just words, phrases, and pronunciation. We are also learning the culture or cultural background of that language. Then we need to have some knowledge of pragmatics. Pragmatics is the study of how language is used in culture or in reality. And then the cultural background is very important to know, to have much deeper knowledge of the language and the culture behind that language. Okay, that's why knowledge of pragmatics allows you to communicate with people with different cultural backgrounds. I have read this sentence twice because it is very important. Okay? Then knowledge of SLA allows you to teach a language more effectively, especially if you are going to choose teaching English at a junior high or high school as your career in future. Then you have to learn second language acquisition. That's required. That's why it is worth studying. Okay? These are the practical reasons. These are some of the practical reasons to study linguistics. Of course, the story doesn't end here. There is the fundamental reason, not just a fundamental reason, but the fundamental reason. So what is it? Before moving on to this, before moving on to the next slide, I would like you to think about the fundamental reason, what can be the fundamental reason. Of course, I cannot go interactive in this setting of lecture, so I assume that you have your own answer to the question, what is the fundamental reason? So, I want to stress the fact that only human beings can use language. Other animals cannot. For example, when the family members gather together, then we always talk about what happened or what is going on around each one of the family members these days. That's how communication goes in normal and daily setting. Okay, communication, or I should say, verbal communication is always there when we gather together. Okay, if we cannot gather together just like these days, unfortunately, but we can communicate with each other through some social networking services on our smartphones, and just like the illustration on this slide, we can communicate with each other through smartphones with the help of technology these days. And even though we cannot speak or we cannot hear for some reasons, we can communicate using sign languages. Okay? We can communicate by our hands and some other ways we can communicate. And the sign language has its own grammar and has its own syntax. So that's quite similar, or it's one of the variations of human language. Okay? So in this way, or I should say, in these ways, human beings can use language, but other animals cannot. So what's the significance of this fact in the context of the reason why we need to learn linguistics? Only human beings can use language and other animals cannot. That means the knowledge about language and the ability to use it are essential characteristics of human beings. Language is essential for us as human beings. And the knowledge about language and the ability to use it are essential characteristics of human beings. So we are humans because we can speak, we can use our language. That's why we are as we are. So what does this mean? There are essential characteristics of human language, and this is taken from the book written by George Yule in 2020. And there are 6 characteristics of human language which are essential. And I cannot go into detail of each one of these 6 essential characteristics, but in this lecture, I want to focus on reflexivity. So what is reflexivity? Reflexivity is the fact that we can use language to think and talk about language itself. That's what we can do through our language, and animals, unfortunately, cannot do that. Only us humans can do that. And we can think and talk about ourselves because we can use our language. And that means language, what makes us as we are. Okay? Only language can make us as we are. Okay? We can think and talk about ourselves because we can use our language. Again, I have read this sentence because it is very important. So, what does this mean? This can be paraphrased into this. To understand human language better means to understand human beings better. That's what I want to stress to you. And I want you to understand this. I say again, to understand human language better means to understand human beings better. So, we learn linguistics learn more about who we really are. When we are talking about linguistics, we are talking about ourselves. When you are talking about linguistics, then you are talking about yourselves. So when you learn more about linguistics, you are learning more about yourselves. Okay? In the beginning, there was words. Language is the beginning of everything related to human beings. Okay? I say again, we learn linguistics to learn more about who we really are. So, why don't you learn linguistics? That's the end of my lecture. And thank you so much for your attention. And these are the references.